and ramp levels and ceiling heights. Most areas in the building are not along an accessible route. Adaptation of the mushroom column and flat plate concrete structure to make accessible and have coherent floor plates for hotel use would be virtually impossible, especially if it was to align with the historic Nassau Street structure. To change the interiors of this building to work as a hotel and to work with the historic structure would be too big of a jump. Next slide. The exterior of the building is a reflection of the fractured interiors, a patchwork of every repair and modification over time, not one taking into account the previous brick color or mortar. The windows on Chambers and Bank Street are also random patchwork from 1/1 to 12/12 double hungs to rusted through steel windows, which actually that's, the lower ones right by the parking lot or my office right now. And the fenestration has been blocked up in some areas with painted concrete block, some areas with painted plywood, and on occasion brick infill, often with radically different colors as well. The surface is also home to a myriad of exterior exposed conduit, which just add to the general disarray of this 3-story structure. This portion of 20 Nassau Street building illustrates little of the architectural interest or historic significance, and it is clear that by maintaining the historic Nassau Street structure, which is significant, it is equally clear that the 2 Chamber Street structures are past their useful life. And now I'll turn it over to Steve.
Thanks, Josh. So just taking some of the narrative that Liz went through on our application, the yellow building is the 20 Nassau Street property where we're looking at the preservation plan. The gray tone is the basement level below it. There is a vault area under Nassau Street that exists. We're set back from the property line about 8 to 9 feet. So we do have an extra wide dimension on Nassau Street for the sidewalk. Along Chamber Street, there's some very shallow basements. Most are utility rooms or mechanical that serve some of the retail as well as serve the building itself through the expansion at the end of the Chamber Street building. And again, trying to illustrate here some of the different components as they were constructed as additions, expansions, not really showing how the different floors don't align at this point. Next slide. So main thing we're looking to do is provide parking under the building, again, for the benefit of the community and to accommodate hotel guests. So the first element of our application is a demolition and excavation around the perimeter. Ultimate massing, we do start to align what's really driving our floor to floor elevations. It's a 9-foot floor to floor height. And we're aligning from the Nassau Street building straight through to the Chambers. So there's no elevation change. It's also lets us use a common elevator inside the Chamber Street area for the hotel lobby, as well as providing a convenient access off of 20 Nassau. And just, going from the ground up, first floor has the arrival as outlined, and then the hotel floors, and then our green roof component. One of the things we're also examining is using photovoltaics to energize our electric vehicle stations in the basement. So we're in some conversations with the folks at Tesla and other providers of that. But essentially the conversion is all guest rooms from the second floor up. Would be the 3rd floor under the 6-story description we went through. And the main element we're creating is a unified presence on Chamber Street, which would include a hotel lobby, a grab and go. The hotel has no event space. It's all guest rooms, no meeting provisions at all either. And main component we're also going to do through the renovation is preserve the Nassau Street retail. So they'll continue in their occupancy while we're renovating. In the diagrams, you see the inner and outer court, the The elements, when we did the bridge that connects from 20 Nassau, we used that as a design feature of our lobby, kind of breaking up the two masses, trying to come up with an articulation that was complementary to the Nassau Street building and provided a scale conversion as we were walking down Chambers. And here you also see the roof screens. All the equipment's fully screened at this point, and creating outer and inner courts for the daylight access to the guest rooms. And as Michael had mentioned, the sightline analysis with about a 9'6" bulkhead. Again, we would be using a dark bronze metallic to look like the copper, oxidized copper for the screens to enclose our mechanical equipment. Green roof elements would be more or less set on trays as a strategy for green roof. So elements you start to see here, Tom had explained, we have these small little pocketed areas as you're moving down Chambers with about a 3-foot relief between the columns, providing a little more depth and some interest of unifying that view into the lobby. The intent is to make the experience something we can share on the street level. Elements we were looking at was, the scale is a little larger. You'll see the windows have an opportunity to be a little bigger. Almost close to floor within the hotel guest rooms. The link bridge is also then done in the dark metal, complementary of the mansard elements. Other things we're doing is the canopy has some wire supports, and then a structural frame that holds up a more or less a pin mounted sign that faces Chamber Street. So we kind of proportion the scale, have kept the muttons very narrow, and the sash and frame edge is as tight as we can make it. Again, copying the historic elements. So just, the architectural plans. This is the street level plan. And this is a little bit interesting because it's also illustrating about a 6-foot elevation change as you come off of Chamber Street. It'll be 6 feet lower than the Nassau Street arrival. So there'll be a small ADA lift that would take you down, as well as some stairs that would connect. You do see the full depth of the Nassau Street retail, which goes into the 1-story portion that we're keeping on the back. And the arrival is where our current loading dock curb cut is. And then vehicles would come in, have the ability to fully turn around and exit, as well as queuing some vehicles for our valet parking. So down below, there's a small F&B venue that we would have in the basement. That's kind of something that many of the graduate hotels have as far as an occupancy. And then we would create a work area for the staff, which would include cafeteria, locker rooms, and then maintain some of the storage for some of the retail up on the first floor. Parking would be 80 valet spaces, which are laid out here that share some stacking areas. This starts to illustrate some of the arrival and the ability to queue some cars, as well as circulate around the auto court. So we have a prominent arrival both in the back at the auto court, as well as the front onto Chamber Street. And start to connect that, as was explained, we have enclosed refuse and recycling that would be brought out to a vehicle, a truck that we could accommodate in the drive aisle. And the other elements here are maintaining the access off of 20 Nassau off hours, and the small staircase that was mentioned that would go down into the F&B venue. But our intent is to maintain, again, the full depth of all these current retail operations. And you'll see there's a small door that gets us out to Bank Street, solely for maintenance of that lot area. It's not a component of our means of egress. So it would just be, periodically used to go out and either for maintenance of cutting the lawn or the landscape improvements. Then we have a mezzanine. So right now that 6-story building also includes mezzanines at 20 Nassau. There's some occupied space below that 1-story roof, as well as the mechanical that's then on the, above that on the inner court. Mostly this would be housekeeping, where our laundry chute would transfer into bins that would be brought downstairs, as well as back of house mechanical for our hot water generation for showers, and a small management office area, and a high level at the drop-off area, as well as a double height lobby.
Steve, before you go on, just real quickly, can you go back to that?
Sure.
Elizabeth, you referenced the question of story, and it's really a definitional type of issue more than anything. The under the building code or fire code, it's mezzanines are not stories, they're sublevels. But the current interpretation by the zoning department was to include that as a story. So when you take a look at Sacred Coffee, Local Greek, Jam and Crepes, they consider that to be 2 stories because it's a double level with an enclosed area that has a mezzanine. So if you take all the mezzanines out, there you have 5 stories based on Derek's interpretation. If you include the mezzanines, there's an additional story. Whether the mezzanines are there or not, it doesn't change the size or shape or anything essentially from the exterior. It's just that the question is whether or not a mezzanine counts as a story or not. Under the fire code, it does not. And it's a question of interpretation under the zoning code. We don't believe that it does. Derek's current interpretation is that he thinks it may be, or that it is actually. Okay.
Correct. So I think that's probably something that will be ironed out when it goes before the board.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And then we have the second floor. One of the reasons we've started to blue this area is we've made some of those changes that we talked about as we get adjacent to the residential district. So we were, we start to drop off a pair of rooms that we had previously in that location to get to the 178 count, as well as we've introduced some suites in the corners. But again, full alignment, 20 Nassau Street is really defining how we expand and migrate over into the new Chamber Street building. And you can see the collection of creating these inner and outer courts in order to get daylight into the hotel rooms. And pretty typical of the 4th and 5th floors. Again, green roof and, going through our mechanical, we do have an emergency generator we're required, which we have behind the screened wall area. A small amount of mechanical on top of 20 Nassau, mostly refrigeration condensers, as well as an energy recovery unit, which is we gather up all of the toilet exhaust and retemper entering air. And then the mechanical that would stay in order to support the retail on the first floor facing Nassau Street. So John Mcdonough is
Yep, I'm here.
planner. Okay.
Hi, everyone. I don't know if you can see me. For some reason, my screen is not showing anything. I do see the exhibits though, and I see you all, but I don't know if you can see me, but I'm here. So that said, I'm the project landscape architect. I'm the project planner. We put together the landscape plans and the lighting plans here. And I'll just flip you through 4 of the exhibits that we have as part of this deck of exhibits. The first shows the, I'll say the roof plan of where the green roof materials are going to go. We've got 3 areas laid out on the new portion of the building or the new roof. And again, if we flip to the next slide, Brooke, you get a sense of what the green roof looks like. It's familiar now. The environmental benefits are well known. The stormwater attenuation, the water quality benefits, all well known. This will be comprised of your sedums, your mosses, your grasses, all drought tolerant materials, easy maintenance, that will certainly have that nice cooling effect and that environmental benefit that is certainly well documented with green roofs. Next slide, please. So this actually will flip you over to the lighting program now. You'll see 4 different types of lights labeled here. There's, if you follow along the streetscape, there's light type A, which are going to be your wall mounted decorative lights. Then if you start to work your way into what I'll call the entry drive on the right-hand portion of this graphic, you see the label of D. Those are going to be recessed wall lights into the wall system to guide motorists down into that entryway. Then sliding to the left, you'll see the label of B. That is going to be recessed ceiling lights that'll be above if you're driving into the entry court. And then finally, sliding to the left, you can see two labels of C, which are going to be just decorative accent lights in that little notch in the building at that particular portion. We don't show it here, but I'll just echo what everyone had said at the outset, is that we have had very good meetings with our neighbor. Were kind enough to bring us onto their deck and show us what they see from the deck looking at the building. We're looking to replicate I'll say the clinging plants, the vines that are there now, the diversity of plantings, and replicate that look on the post-development condition. And then finally, there is an extension that goes out to Bank Street, which we're also looking to landscape as well. We're soliciting input from the community in that regard. But the gist of it is we're looking at a low hedge to screen the parking lot that's adjacent to our neighbor to the north. And then also to provide for maybe a tree or two upright, striking a balance that we don't shade that particular side of that building. That is a southern facing facade, and we don't want to take away from the light that comes onto that particular piece. That's the gist of the landscape. Oh, these are the types of plantings that we're showing. Again, the one that you see boxed out in the right-hand portion is the streetscape type lights that we were looking at with that sort of bell feel to it. And then you do see an arm extending off to the right as well. And I don't think we have any others. Brooke, I think that's all we have in terms of the details here for the light fixtures. I think that's it for me.
And they would differ between the 20 Nassau and the Chamber Street building. The more articulate would be on the 20 Chambers, and the more kind of industrial historic light would be on the new building.
Thanks, Steve. Yes.
All right, Steve, take us through the next couple, please.
Next one, really, again, just street activation. As mentioned that we do have bike racks. I think that historic light that we see there has already been removed to an overhead lamp on Nassau Street, but we would be removing, because of our illumination of the sidewalk on Chambers, taking out 2 historic lamps. And the other main activation, again, is, one unified occupancy on Chambers Street, just to create a vitality. Other elements that are part of the Graduate brand is the engagement of rental bikes for the community. We have storage down at the cellar level as well as on grade, so people can grab a bike back in the auto court and take off. And right now there's some elements where there is some outdoor dining, which now has become more important than ever. That is available with the widened Nassau Street presence that we have. On the parking side, as Liz mentioned, currently as an office building, we have a variance for 214 spaces. Our proposal introduces, a future build of 80 spaces we'd be providing. We've done some surveys that indicate that the utilization at Graduate hotels is probably half that. So we would have the ability of, nighttime parking being available for some of the commercial district. And again, the main benefit by changing from a office to a hotel use is our demand is primarily overnight. So we have a downtown improvement that we're able to complement, about 195 spaces being gained, with the understanding that the current office occupancy was using up to 214 spaces by its zoning calculation. So some great benefits there related to what we're able to bring to the community, introducing some off-site parking, as well as discussion with the neighbors about making sure we get vehicles off of Chambers Street to get a proper drop-off, rather than somebody pulling up and then trying to unload bags. So we kind of created an interesting arrival court that's a mix of outdoor space. You drive under the building and then arrive at a skylit arrival area. And again, have, plenty of operational rooms. Although we're showing 9 spaces, we think, customary operation would run under about 4 or 5 vehicles in queuing. So we have plenty of maneuverability on this level and, direct connection to the ramp as well as the lobby. So just to walk through how we're organized, interestingly, our front exposure is on Chamber Street, mostly being driven by the way the building's organized with the setback off of Nassau that has the vaults underneath it, and as well the side yards on the side. Our backyard is then up against the R4 district, as well as our neighboring commercial buildings that are on Nassau Street. So one of the elements we've been addressing is the required setback at that neighbor and the exposure of what the Bank Street looks like. So some items that we've been looking at is, as you looked at that maneuvering plan, what it would take to kind of accommodate, a different setback. Right now, we looked at building that 1-story, covering it. We have a certain height wall, trying to minimize the impact of vehicle movements on that auto court and, provide some relief architecturally onto the back of Bank Street. So elements that we're looking at is a common separation of that. So right now we have a current building that's 32 feet tall along that corner. And it's kind of a mix of, multi-windows that Josh went through, some filled in with plywood, some with stucco, and would be changing that over to one of the changes that we made in our count lost 2 rooms. Previously, we had that as a 2-story element or 3 stories, depending on our 5 versus 6. And then also had a kind of a lower fence wall that ran across the auto court. But after having some conversations with some of the neighbors, we looked at a solution that, creates a masonry wall up against the neighbors, as well as eliminates the 2 rooms, improves the amount of daylight, making it into that those backyards of the Bank Street homes. And then Josh, you're going to walk through.
I was muted. Yeah, so quick review of the FAR. This is an illustration of our central business district. The buildings in white are compliant with the FAR of 1.5 or below. All the others are existing non-conforming. So everything you see that's orange here is not in conformance with the FAR. So to be clear, the majority of the central business district is over the allowable FAR. Next slide. The project site is here shown in blue in the left-hand corner here. The buildings in red have an FAR of 3 to 4. The hotel is proposing a 3.8, which would be in line with the Palmer Square and the buildings around Spring Street and Hines Plaza, with the Henderson building on Witherspoon Street having an FAR well over 4. So although requiring a variance, it is not out of scale with the CBD, with the overall central business district. Next slide. Now going to signage. Here you see some historic images of Nassau Street with some of the signage highlighted. The signage is a mix of facade, blade signs, awning signs, glazing signs. This is something that the hotel is trying to capture, sort of this texture of what Nassau Street was and what it could be. Next slide. The large blade sign proposed on Nassau Street on the corner has been scaled to work with the size of the building in a very similar way that the Lahair sign works with the scale of its facade. But the hotel sign occupies less of its facade than the Lahair sign, only 31%. Please note that Nassau Street tenants will still have their signage on the awnings. So all the commercial tenants will still have their signage on the awnings, including the 3 that are on Chambers Street for Sacred. The awnings for the hotel on Chambers will not have any text. Next slide. These are the overall signs being proposed at this time. Please note the pylon sign that had previously been noted as a 6th, I believe, or 5th sign variance has been eliminated. And so we've eliminated that signage variance, that one signage variance. That sign previously had parking rates on it, and that'll be moved into the drive court. So it's not actually seen from the street. The large blade sign that was on Chambers Street has been converted to a smaller sign indicating drop off and parking area. And then the large blade sign that we noted is scaled to fit with the facade, the large graduate one. There are 2 entry signs for the hotel, one above the Nassau Street entry, which sits in the existing opening, and another at the new Chambers entry that sits on top of the metal canopy. And both of them are in scale with the openings that they present. I mentioned the drop-off area. And also one thing to note is that the drop-off sign previously, this was another graduate blade sign, and that has gotten considerably smaller than the original blade sign that was there. The last sign is a glazing sign, and for now it calls out Poindexter, but this is just a placeholder for the name of the F&B establishment, which would be in the existing basement down below. And I believe Steve is taking us to the conclusion.
Yep. So we have some before and after views, again, looking at the corner of Chamber and Nassau. Again, aligning our cornice, continuing with a mansard element to help with the reduction of height. Illustrate also the amount at that inner court where we would be reducing the height of that parapet. And the view from Chambers being, taking a 3-story building and making it 5. Some views along Bank Street. Some things we've been talking to the neighbor about was creating a green wall system that would be up to about 10 foot of height. This also includes the discussion item with the neighbors of taking the masonry wall at the outer court up higher. As I mentioned, the fire escape from the gun building would have to be maintained, and shows the greening and some planting suggestions that we've introduced to the neighbors on Bank Street as some of the improvements of our narrow lot that goes out from the building. Again, only accessible for maintenance of that area. And again, some views here, that height is 14 feet lower than the current building in that corner. And we set back, 10 foot out of pinch point, gets a little wider at this location because of the site geometry. And then along the front, a unified occupancy of Chambers Street, high visibility into the hotel lobby and cafe, the grab and go, as well as recognizing the cornice line and the mansard along the front. We maintain the metal panel system around the sides as part of a suggestion of making it appear to be a mansard, but making the height reduced. And as we said, some of the details are a little different in their complementary nature of how we address 20 Nassau. With the sills and headers being expressed.
And Steve, you said the bump-ins was that 4 feet in to?
3 feet about. Yep.
Okay, 3 feet for the sidewalks where you could bump them in.
So you get the relief there, and the entrance itself has a double relief element where the glass wall and then the doors are a little bit deeper even.
Yep.
And of course, this includes eliminating the historic light fixtures that are along there to help out with the limited width. And as we were explaining, the historic lighting would be on the Chambers Street building, 2 larger fixtures by scale on either side of the 20 Nassau Street entrance, and then transitioning into the more industrial type light that would be at the Chambers Street expansion. And we've made some color shifts from the original application. Our orange has changed to a black sign on the corner with white letters, as well as the other signs, the blade signs.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
That
So
kind
that's our main presentation. We have our team available for questions. But that's our presentation for this evening.
All right, well, thank you. I'd like to get feedback from the commission first. Maybe we could go back to the grid, but if anyone would like to ask questions, I believe the whole team is available. I wanted to note that I was aware of some issues with Bank Street neighbors, and I'm really glad that you're addressing those issues. Those were sort of forefront in my mind, is how to integrate something like this with an historic residential neighborhood right next to it. So I think all the improvements you've made to mitigate the presence of the building on the Bank Street side have been and really in the right direction. So,
and if I may, just to kind of give you an idea, we meet monthly virtually with the Bank Street neighbors, and this is still an ongoing process, and we really are trying to work with them so that they're happy and that we're happy.
oh, that's great. Are there other questions about the Bank Street facade?
The existing stores and restaurants, where will they go? And are they coming back once you have done the building?
So the restaurants and stores along Nassau Street, which are Sancred Coffee, Local Greek, Milk and Cookies is in there, Nassau Barber and Jam and Crepes are going to be there and remain there. So they're not going to be moved out at all.
And actually, a number of the Chambers Street tenants were moved to Nassau Street to fill empty storefronts there.
Like Nassau Barbers is a good example, and the cookies.
And there's access within the building and outside also, is that correct?
The stores?
To the stores, is that the question?
Yes,
Store access is only from the outside.
on the outside.
for the public. The service can get though to the lower level where there's some storerooms.
It's going to be the same way it is today, essentially, same access it is today.
And what about questions about building materials, details?
Well, again, we're matching the brick. Our metals are really complementary of the copper color.
Mm-hmm.
We
We've
changed.
added there's some soldier coursing that's on the new building that runs around the backside of it in order to articulate some of that, some soldier coursing that occurs in the recess of the entry.
We originally had orange signs and Sprab did not like the color and we switched it to black and it actually looks really nice that way.
And I have a question for Ed, Ed Schmier. So Ed, we're advisory, so we're basically putting a memo together for the zoning board. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're going to send your comments over to the zoning board.
All right. Okay, so are there other comments we'd like to pass along?
Yeah,
Yes, Robert.
I think, the basic concept is I'm not unhappy with that. I think it does work in many ways. One of the things that I do find disturbing, though, is, first of all, the large blade sign on Nassau Street. It's far too large. I think we'd agreed earlier that the blade signs were not expected to extend up beyond the second story. This goes way up. And I think it's overpowering, and there's nothing else like it on Nassau Street. The Lahair sign we've known all along is a historic thing that's not it's not really in line with everything else, but should remain for that reason. But I think the addition of this one is a mistake. Beyond that, I think if we go back to the previous slide showing the elevations on Chambers Street.
The signage drawing, Robert, or?
No, there's one before that that you showed before that showed more of the Chambers Street elevation.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
This one.
You know, this here. I find this sort of vertical element, I think I understand why the buildings are being separated to break them up so that it's not so massive. But it's also rather strange, I think, if this had been, you know, a vertical lobby or something like that, a stairwell or something, it might make some sense. But these are just hotel rooms with all this glass. But I think also what it does is this vertical element is out of keeping with the general character of the area. And I think it would be more appropriate to keep a recess and I don't think one needs a recess anything more than what is there, but to continue the brick. There isn't any vertical element like this in the whole downtown area that I know of. And I think that I find disturbing. I also think it's the basic proportions of the windows, which are much larger, of course, is not a proportion that is found elsewhere. That's perhaps less of a problem than this sort of vertical glass and steel element, which doesn't really reflect what goes on inside the building as well.
Are there other?
Unlike the bridge, which is between the old building and the new, which is not only set back further, but that does make sense as a glazed element.
Are there other comments about the facade on Chambers Street?
Yes.
Yeah, Elric.
Yeah, I want to start off just by praising the presentation. Too often we find ourselves educating the applicants about architectural elements with which they're not particularly familiar. I'll tell you, I learned a lot this afternoon, and I appreciate the diligence of the investigations and the willingness to take extensive measures to preserve as much as they have. 20 Nassau looks to me as if it will only be improved. But I wanted to speak while this particular image was on the screen. I measured the windows while we were from their plans, and it looks to me like they're about 42, 44 inches wide. You can see curtains in the background in all these rooms. My image of motel rooms is the first thing you do when you check into a hotel motel. Half the time, particularly for the night, is to close the curtains. I think these are oversized, and I would love, they don't have to be as narrow as the ones on Nassau Street, but I think proportionately they would be improved if they were not so wide. The other two things I just look for the awkwardness. Most of this flows certainly much better than what exists today in the back area. But a few things jump out at me. The first is where the hyphen is, and you're going to remove the center block, which is terrific. But it seems, is it possible for it to be the plane to be recessed a bit, or something, some element to be introduced? Because it just jumps out at me. But more to the point, perhaps, would be, I respect the fact you're trying to emulate the copper roof on 20 Nassau. But I think it would be more successful, for one thing, if you increase the depth of the cornice. that's a definite break in between the materials, and there's just too much of one plane here. And you were talking about not having a recess. I don't object particularly to the glass. I would like to feel more of the recess. But as that roof turns the corner, and what you can see from Bank Street and presumably looking back from Chambers Street is totally vertical, and it just looks artificial to me. It doesn't really. Again, I think a cornice would help. I would like to see the angle preserved as it moves around the corner. I think that wouldn't be. I just think it would be improved. But and the other thing is on the back from the Bank Street, there's that big area where there's no break in that metal. And looking up at 20 Nassau, there are those two chimneys which serve as a break and sort of unify the material below and above. I don't know how you could do it, but I think that's just awkward looking to me. And I'm sure the tenants, the community on Bank Street appreciates the fact that you're not going to have transient guests looking out into your backyard or whatever. But I think above that, it's a very false note in my view. And maybe with some more greenery on the upper wall or whatever, it could be softened a bit, but it's pretty harsh as it is. All in all, though, I really want to praise all the people who've been involved in this and the attention to the neighborhood, to the original building, and to the scale of the surrounding structures in Princeton, and whatever these criticisms that I'm offering stand for it. Please understand that on the whole, I think this is will be an improvement. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Elric. Are there other comments?
I'd like just to say that I certainly agree with Elric on the setback of that low area right next to the 20 Nassau portion on that fronts on Nassau Street. Moving that back just a few feet the same way the entrance is moved back would really be helpful and create a distinction between the two buildings. And I also agree with the cornice. I think the cornice looks very weak on compared to the other. It need not be a replica of it. I don't think it necessarily should be, but it could be deeper. And I think that would be an improvement. Mm-hmm. And the wall from Bank Street, the first thing, putting green on that wall would be helpful to break that up in some way. I think that would be. One could carry green all the way up to that first cornice line.
All right, are there other comments?
Yeah, if I could take a turn.
Yeah.
I have several comments. I want to start with the windows, and I appreciate that the windows on 90 or the portion of 20 Nassau that's being kept were discussed in such detail, because they are the element that seems to be important. And did I understand that only on the back, where exactly are the windows that need to be lowered some? Are they on Chambers or Nassau Street, or is it on one of the backs?
In the two courtyards. Yeah.
The two courtyards.
Outer and inner court.
And I heard a lot of talk about things, but we kind of danced around the question of the actual sash themselves. Are they going to be replaced with true divided lights or not?
Well, we're going to put insulated unit in, so it wouldn't be divided lights. It would be an attached button.
They'll have a grid on the exterior, which is milled in with the sash.
Okay, I think we want to see a sample of that. or discuss it some more if we're not going to be reviewing actual
I
materials.
believe it's a window that you've actually previously approved as well.
There's a Marvin and a Pella that we were looking at.
And that we previously voted on them?
Other projects, yes. I know the
Well,
market.
that doesn't count. It's always on, each building's considered individually.
Mhm.
So I think that's a big issue. I think when windows have been talked about so much, and then to change them from true divided to not is going to give a very different look. But that's my comment on that. But then when the windows are then also featured in the new parts, and I think the proportions are kind of very different. And I don't understand why on the new part, there are these multi-plane, thank you, these multi-pane windows. That just seems like kind of a bringing over a false historical element that's not being really used in that atmosphere. And I guess that brings up my whole question is, on this new building, and since you do have the nice separation from 20 Nassau with that then one-story portion and then all the new stuff, is why are we trying so hard to be 20 Nassau all over again? You have an opportunity to be something that's distinct and fresh and 21st century. I think this is all kind of, I think what it draws is everyone's going to say, well, that didn't quite transfer right. The mansard doesn't look quite right. The windows don't look quite right. Why don't we just have a fresh start? So that's my comment on that. And then I think it's also very hard to get brick to match to really look right. We'll try very hard, but I think we'll always look a little bit different. And then on the mansards, if you're going to keep them, could they have the same profile as the existing building, and maybe the same pitch would be better than this looks like a kind of a nod to history, but not really making it. So I'm afraid of details that are trying to mimic 20 Nassau, just kind of coming off as kind of a cheap reproduction. I would just rather see it be something distinct and new than this. That's my feeling.
Do you have any comments about separating the two, the entryway on Chambers Street?
Separating it?
Yeah, the glazed portion that separates.
Oh, on
Once-
Chambers Street. I thought you said that.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. What I think it does more is it breaks up the massing to be a little more appropriate to me. That it's three masses, 20 Nassau, then the two new pieces. And I think that vertical part does is help take that breath between them.
Mhm.
So I kind of like that part.
Okay, all right. Are there other comments that we can pass along?
I had a question about the Nassau Street entrance. I couldn't quite tell how that relates to the lobby, and also the sign that's hanging down in the entrance. To me, it's hard to see because it's not super large in the image that you guys shared, but it looks kind of large for the space and sort of low. And that's such a sort of sweet little entryway there. And I wondered if you guys could talk a little bit more about your thinking about that entrance.
So Brooke, it might be best to show a plan. I mean, the entrance also is access to one of the retail elements where Milk and Cookies is now moving into, I guess that was Little Bites. So you can see there's a door go on both sides. So that's part of the component. And we saw this as kind of an off hours as people are coming back to the hotel, possibly a shortcut going down Chambers Street, but also to create some activity where people could leave the hotel and go straight onto Nassau instead of passing through the lobby. And again, we have an elevation change that also becomes a connected stairwell to the guest rooms above in the Nassau Street building. So there is, there's a slight 6-foot elevation difference as you migrate across the site. This would be about 4 feet difference. between the Nassau Street arrival and the Chamber Street floor plan.
Brenna, were you asking about the signage in front of
And then
that
the sign, I
entrance
think,
door?
the sign right now would occupy essentially what is a transom height on the existing storefronts,
It aligns with the transoms.
right? Ones with the transoms.
All right, does that answer your question, Brenna?
Yeah, I think, I would be curious to know if anyone else found sort of the size and style of that sign relative to kind of the street number on that entrance a little bit troubling, or if it's just me, that's okay.
I agree with you. I think that that's one of the singular element of the original building that remains. And this particular building, because of that mezzanine, has quite a band above the first story that's broad. And if there was to be any sign at all, there's enough room for it above the door rather than within the door frame.
Well, it actually is above the door. I mean,
Above the door.
it occupies a zone where the stores on either side, the bottom of the sign aligns with the transom in the stores. So it's well above your head. It lines
It's probably a little overscaled in this rendering at the moment.
it
Yeah,
lines up with
I
it.
think it may be. I think
Yeah.
it may be.
All right, are there other comments about, well, especially the Chamber Street facade, ideas about the mansard or the lobby area? I can't really see anyone else on the screen, so you're gonna have to just talk.
David brought up the concept of something that was very much more modern or something like that. I think that's a possibility, certainly, but I do think that certain elements, such as the basic proportions of windows and so on, could still be used in such a thing that, as Elric had suggested. But I do think also this one little connecting wall above the lowered portion, really, if it just got back a few feet, would really be helpful. It looks like a very awkward connection.
All right. Any other comments on Chamber Street? Elizabeth, do you want to open this up to the public?
Sure. Let me see if there's anyone's, there are two questions here, but I'm not sure that they, let's see. Let me go to the participants. See if we have, okay. Tony Nellison, we're going to elevate you to be a panelist.
And I guess if we could stop sharing the screen, that would be great. Thank you.
Did you come over?
All right, I
Stays
see
on
Tony.
mute.
Yeah, Tony, oh, there you are.
Yeah, I'm good. Good presentation, guys. I mean, really nice job of presentation tonight. And I must tell the Historic Commission that it has been a really interesting experience working with the folks from the hotel. As you probably know, I own both 11 and 13 Bank Street, which is directly behind the hotel. And our neighbor on 15 is a small portion of it, but we're the ones who are primarily impacted by the hotel, not just our backyard, but then the driveway or the whatever that thing is called on the side. And we've had a lot of discussions about that. And it's really kind of fascinating to watch how the hotel has evolved over time, and we've had several meetings with the neighbors, including, big meetings with everybody in the gun parking lot and then several Zoom meetings. And they have modified the hotel, setting it back. And there are things that have been accomplished, but there are also things that have not been accomplished. And I think, as Pablo said earlier, we will continue these discussions. But I must say that I agree, I think, with a good number of the comments, but particularly as you guys have looked at Chambers Street, if you really focus on what we see from Bank Street, there has been suggestions as well, what happens if you carry the mansard around? Or what happens if the cornice got slightly larger? What would happen if you take that area which is set back and make that a green roof as well, as opposed to just cascading down the side? And as you probably have noticed, that the windows in the back are just simply punched in, whereas the windows on Chambers Street all have lintels and sills, on them. So there's a very much of a difference between the front facade of the building and what we see from historic Bank Street. And I think that's something that obviously should be considered at some point. But all in all, it's been a really pretty positive working experience with them. We appreciate that, they have brought those buildings up. They're leaving the walls relatively high to obscure the lights coming in. They've set the building back at that second level, but there's still elements of more additional greening that would like. And then whether it's in the purview of the historic folks or not, everybody's concerned about the traffic, including the traffic engineer, in terms of what happens to Bank Street that way. And particularly the neighbors have been very upset about this door that's going to that old driveway. And we were told it's there for maintenance to take care of the grass or what have you, but everybody's afraid on that street that over time, that door is going to become more than just an access way to a maintenance area. And the recommendation from the neighbors is close that door off. Just close that door off so there's no access from Bank Street for any, people passing drugs through the back door or God knows what what happened, but no one wants that and they're all a little bit scared of that. Now, I know this is probably not within the purview, but there's still issues of the noise and the abatement and the lead and all the rest of the stuff. But again, the owners have been very accommodating and saying, well, we'll deal with this issue. We'll deal with the lead issue. We'll deal with the pollution issue. We'll deal with the piling issue when they have to pound the pilings down. If there's any cracks, we'll take care of that. So they have really been very good about it. But I would caution you or just ask you to look again at the back of the building a little bit more in the same great level of discretion that you used on the Chambers Street edge of it, and see whether or not there is a possibility of actually improving that even more than what they have done thus far. But all in all, we're pretty, I think the neighbors will find out they have really been really good neighbors and they have been really good in terms of making sure. And I also saw on the plan that a lot of the ideas that were, I think the Zoom call was last week, they have bicated that little corner, the northwest corner of the site on some of the plans. That's now been cut straight, is now modified. So every suggestion we have made, they have come back with some response. But again, look at the back, look at the back, because that's what we see primarily from the Bank Street, and it will be that which will contribute to the character of Bank Street in the future. So thank you for that.
All right, thank you, Tony. Elizabeth, are there others waiting to comment?
Let me look. Let me see if there's anyone else. I actually do not see any more hands up.
Okay.
I would recommend for the public, if you do have some comments, please put your hands up now because the public comment time might end soon.
Right. And just going back to the commission, we've had, I think, obviously this is going to zoning, so the traffic and the safety at the intersection, all those things are going to be dealt with there. I think we're more concerned about the Bank Street area, and then, you know, obviously design choices, whether they're on Nassau Street or on Chambers Street. Are there other comments about the Chambers Street facade, since that seems to,
Madam Chair, I have elevated
yeah.
Bill Gray from the public.
Oh, okay, and Michael Laplace also is going to speak, I think.
Okay, Bill, you can unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, hello. Hello, everyone. I missed a good portion of the beginning of the meeting, and I've only been on for maybe 45 minutes, maybe an hour. So I don't know if this falls under the purview of the Historic Commission, as Tony says, but the neighbors are concerned about the loss of sunlight and the increase in shadows created by particularly the high part of the building along Chambers Street on the lower portion of, as you go down Chambers Street towards Wholefish, that whole bulk of building in the back.
Yes. I'm on a Zoom call with the Historic Commission.
So I don't know if that's something you can discuss now, or will we wait till zoning?
Madam Chair, that was one of the comments I had in my report for HPC to consider. So I don't know if that's something they want to talk about now.
Okay.
Right. Well, I think that would be involved with the Chambers Street facade, and any comments about that facade, whether it involves height or proportion. I mean, so far, there's been comments on the proportions of the windows, the mansard definition, and then
way back when in New Orleans.
I mean, I don't know if anyone would propose that that side be lower, or I haven't really heard any comments.
Well,
David?
Yeah, so I guess I have been thinking about this, is that part of our responsibility is, you know, looking out for historic resources in the community. That's part of what our charge is. And so the impact on Bank Street seems to me like it is something we should be discussing. And I'm thinking of the very basis or the very beginning of historic districts and the arguments from New Orleans and the Vieux-Carré Commission about blocking light and air. It seems like that's like one of the fundamentals of historic preservation district concerns. I guess it's zoning, but as you say, Elizabeth, it's part of what we're looking at. I don't know how to calculate that or understand those concerns. I just know that that's something that's has the potential to have an impact on our other historic district. I leave my comments there.
Robert, you're on mute, Robert? There you go.
I would be more concerned if the orientation were somewhat different, but it isn't the south. It isn't, you know, there's still a fair amount of light coming in because of the orientation of the site. I mean, basically the building itself is north of Bank Street. And I think that it certainly will have some effect on light because the early lower eastern sun coming in will be reduced. There's no question about that. But from the south and the west, there isn't going to be much of a change. And I think that probably that's not as much of a concern as it might be with a different orientation.
One of the diagrams for winter solstice showed a shadow from the back portion of the hotel, what is the north portion of the hotel behind Tony's house. And a shadow that doesn't exist now from the existing building is present, and it goes all the way down to 23 Bank Street. So there is an impact on the amount of light that reaches well down into Bank Street, 23, 25. It's about 3/4 of the way down the street. And right now there is no shadow, and the proposed building creates a shadow. So it is a concern. People live in the houses and we need light. And light is part of its history. You know, the houses are so close together that we kind of absorb the light as much as we can when we get it. We don't have light all the time because of the orientation of the existing houses. So it is a resource that we're going to lose, and that does affect our psyche in a way, and our ability to live comfortably on the street.
All right, thank you. Michael Laplace, I know you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you.
Go
Hi,
ahead.
everyone. Just a couple comments. First of all, I'm thrilled to see that from the very beginning, the applicant has worked closely with the community. They've worked with municipal staff and officials, and they've met with the Bank Street. I'm glad that there's an ongoing dialogue with the residents of Bank Street and other parts of the downtown. So I really applaud that. I wanted to say I'm thrilled to see an adaptive reuse of a historic building. Obviously, 20 Nassau is an incredibly important component of the Nassau streetscape and the corridor there. One thing I did want to mention, I heard a comment. Oh, and I wanted to say, I think Robert made a good point about southern exposure, but it would be reasonable for the Historic Preservation Commission to ask the applicant to maybe go into detail before the zoning board and show some diagrams about, you know, shading and how it affects. That's a very reasonable, that's very reasonable to ask for that kind of information for the zoning board. I wanted to quickly say, I think it was Robert's comment too about that one-story connector that's actually a part of the original building, that it's behind the main block of 20 Nassau, but it faces Chambers. I think Robert had the suggestion of it being maybe recessed so that there's sort of a visual break between the old and the new. And I think that would be nice, but I think it has to be weighed with the fact that that one-story section is original to the building. And I don't think we want to just take away original components of the significant 20 Nassau Street block. You know, I think the fact that it stops after 1.5 stories, and then there's a space above it does kind of help break up the old and the new. So I just wanted to comment on that. But I think this has been a wonderful process, and I'm glad it's continuing in such a positive manner. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Elizabeth, do you have any other people waiting to comment?
I do not see anybody else.
Okay, so as far as wrapping up what we're proposing, I mean, I think the site views and shade and shadow studies are a great idea. Also, concern about the wall between the 20 Nassau and 20 Chambers Street, either recessing that back. Definitely there were comments on the new mansard that it's more defined. There was definitely back and forth on that glazed section at the lobby on Chambers Street. So Robert did not feel comfortable with it. David did. I feel like it breaks up the monolithic sense of the building, and it's kind of necessary to have some break there. Let's see, are there the proportion of the windows on Chambers Street were bothersome to some people and felt that they were oversized. Are there other comments I'm missing?
Signs were mentioned.
Oh, the signs, right. So the signs, both the sign on Nassau Street, if that's appropriately sized over the entry there, and then there was an objection to the sign of the blade sign. At least not the blade sign, but the size of the blade sign on Nassau Street.
And just what about the general approach to the whole Chambers Street side with,
Well, yeah, and the suggestion that there could possibly just be a completely different approach on Chambers Street, and instead of mimicking the brick and the mansard roof, to have a completely modern facade that was totally different. But Ed, is this the kind of thing we vote on, or we just put together our suggestions and then send it in the memo?
Well, I think I would suggest that with the issues you just outlined, it might be appropriate to have the HPC keep the application for another meeting, maybe a special meeting, and to see whether or not the applicant can address any of these issues, rather than send it over with a list of 7 or 8 or 9 concerns. Maybe some of those concerns could be addressed. I don't know what the timing is before the Zoning Board of Adjustment, but it's possible that some of these suggestions and the continued meeting with the folks on Bank Street might lead to solutions or recommendations for some of these concerns. You may still send it over with your review and report, but I think it's possible. And with such a significant application, I think it'd probably be a worthwhile thing for HPC to look at it again, maybe not as long as you did this evening, but to have some of the issues addressed if the applicant is willing to come back and present.
I did talk to the zoning officer, and at this time it is not scheduled because I did have a concern that it might take more than one meeting depending on how much conversation there was with the commission and the public. So at this point, it is not scheduled on zoning.
We've had a fairly long time, since our last SPRAB, and there's some of these questions, we're not even going to be able to sort of kind of resolve without input from the zoning board, I don't think. I think, I think the comments are all there, and I think we could get the information together and present it to the zoning board. I'm not sure why we would need to come back.
Well, first of all, because we're going to end the meeting soon, because we have to be done within a few minutes. And
so we have about 5 minutes to wrap things up.
Yeah, and this is a big project. It's substantial. It's important, not only for the central business, but for Bank Street. And I don't think that the commission really has even had an opportunity to talk about the Bank Street side, or even the fact about that 10-foot encroachment. Are they going to be supporting that? They feel it's okay, because that is part of the encroachment within the historic district. So I think there is a little bit more to talk about. That's just my opinion.
All right. So we really do have to wrap up here because the council needs our Zoom, our Zoom address. So I don't know, Christopher.
We should always be so lucky.
So how are
just something I don't know if it's possible or not. I know that with the 166 John Street application, you put together your comments and report, and then that got submitted to zoning as a complete package, and then we were able to move that project forward. And I think that with the length of time between when we presented the SPRAB and now, and the length of time that the project has been sort of trying to move forward, understanding COVID and all the challenges that we all face, maybe that's a way that you could list your comments and our client can respond to those comments, but then at least we can be moving forward towards zoning.
Josh, I don't
Julie,
think,
if the board in the next 4 minutes wanted to vote on this in terms of what would go into the report, we have plenty to put into the report, and those issues could be addressed once they get over to zoning. So if the applicant's asking for that, this certainly could be done. But I think at the outset, the HPC should lead by saying that it supports either strongly or modestly or whatever the application, and subject to having these other issues which came up during your hearing addressed by the land use board. I think there should be some affirmative statement about the project, subject to the 8 different points that you just raised, which would be explored further, as Josh just pointed out, before the zoning board.
Madam Chair, I just got an email from the administrator. He wants us off.
Well, Elizabeth,
I
let's
know.
resolve this.
6:45, but just to let the applicant know, the chair and I did talk about perhaps a special meeting, possibly November 2nd. And I don't know if the chair wants to discuss that as an option for the commission to see if they'd be available to still have a quorum.
Well, let's see a raise of hands of how many want to just vote now or, and how many want to do a special meeting?
Okay, how many people would like to vote now? Raise of hands. How many people would like
Okay.
to carry it to a special meeting? 1, okay, that's the
Okay.
majority.
All right. So if you wouldn't have to have the whole group here, but if there would be some way of getting together on November 2nd, was it?
Right.
Which is a Monday at 4 p.m. To wrap up this discussion and maybe get some kind of feedback on the things that were raised. That would probably be the best solution.
Just trying to move this quickly. Can I get a sign of how many HPC members would be available to make that quorum?
On
Okay,
the
1,
2nd.
2,
Okay, 1, 2,
Okay.
3, 4. Yeah, so we'd
Let's
have a
go.
quorum.
All right, and Mr. DeGrazio, is it possible for you to make that date?
I don't know about my team, where they are. Was that
November 2nd, 2 weeks, at 4 p.m.
At 4 p.m. How about,
You could let us know, because I also have to check to make sure I can have that Zoom time. But we do have a new license, so I think that that's going to work out.
Almost.
Julie, what you need then is an oral motion to continue the hearing until November 2nd. No further notice is required.
Okay. All right.
yep, I think most of my team can make it.
Okay.
And again, I think it's going to be mostly to refine the board's sort of comments and direction, because like you said, David likes the modern section in the middle and wants it across the whole building. Other people like so if we can go through, kind of organize the thoughts, and we'll take a look at it from our end as well. But I think that would be helpful on the 2nd to kind of have, sort of a uniform direction, or if there's different opinions, cite it out.
Next week.
Well, and then also there would be maybe more of a response to the concerns on Bank Street.
Yeah, we could certainly, we could go through certain things that we talked about and, yep.
Okay, great. So is there a motion Is there a motion to continue this on November 2nd, 4 PM?
I so move.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carried. All right, thank you guys. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the 2nd.
See you on the
All right.
second.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you.
Um, Okay, so I guess we're all ending. Thank you.
Gonna get tossed.